When you hear the word drug, you think chemistry. When you hear the word soul, you think religion. But in ancient Greece, those two ideas were never separate, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. The Greek word for soul is psyche, pronounced psyche. Before church doctrine, before medieval theology, before dualism, it meant breath, life, the animating force of a living body, not a floating ghost, not a detachable spirit, not a transparent version of you that survives death. In Homer, the earliest Greek literature we have, when someone dies, their psyche leaves like a breath or a shadow. It is barely conscious. It is not reasoning. It is not philosophizing. It is life leaving the body. If breathing stops, the psyche is gone. That is the starting point. Now we move into classical philosophy. Plato expands the meaning of psyche. It can now refer to the mind, the seat of desire, the inner self, the place of emotion. But even here, it is not separate from the body. Greek medicine did not treat the soul as detachable. Physicians believed bodily balance, heat, cold, bile, blood, directly affected the psyche. If black bile increases, you get melancholy. If heat rises, you get mania. Change the body, and you change the psyche. That is embodied psychology. Now we introduce the second word, pharmakon. Pharmakon, we translate it as drug, but that English word is too narrow. In Greek, pharmakon means a substance with power. It can heal, it can poison, it can sedate, it can inflame, it can purify, it can corrupt. Same word. In Homer again, Helen mixes a pharmakon into wine that removes grief and anger. That is not metaphor. That is a substance-altering emotional state. Now we move to Galen, the most influential physician of antiquity. He categorizes drugs by what they do to the body: heating drugs, cooling drugs, drying drugs, moistening drugs. These alter the body's mixture, what he calls the crasis. And here is where it becomes critical. Galen explicitly explains that when the bodily mixture changes, the psyche changes with it. Cooling drugs can dull cognition, heating drugs can agitate, excess imbalance can disturb perception. Wine alters awareness. The soul was not floating above the body. It was responsive to chemistry. For Galen, this was not metaphor. It was causation. Only after pharmacology was already understood as altering internal states does pharmakon expand metaphorically. Plato calls writing a pharmakon. Plutarch says philosophy is a pharmakon for the diseases of the soul. Education is a pharmakon. Punishment is a pharmakon. Why? Because the model already exists. The soul can be sick. The soul can be imbalanced. The soul can be treated. They borrowed medical language because they already understood the psyche in physiological terms. Greek anthropology works like this. Imbalance leads to disorder. Substance leads to transformation. Purging leads to restoration. Drugs treat madness. Drugs treat melancholy. Drugs induce ecstasy. Drugs calm rage. The pharmakon does not just fix flesh. It recalibrates the entire human system. There is no hard wall between drug, body, mind, and soul. They operate inside one integrated system. So when later texts talk about purification, renewal, transformation of the inner person, that language already exists inside a medical and philosophical framework where substances and psychic states are linked. The conceptual architecture was already there. The Greeks already thought like this. The soul is embodied. The body is chemical. The chemical alters the psychic. The psychic shapes the moral. Pharmakon is the bridge. So when you hear the word soul, do not imagine a medieval ghost. Imagine breath, heat, vitality, mixture. And when you hear the word drug, do not imagine only modern pharmacy. Imagine transformation, alteration, recalibration of the entire human system. In Greek thought, drugs and soul were never separate categories. They were part of the same operating system. And this is only the beginning, because the word pharmakon does not just mean drug. It also leads to another word, pharmakos, and that opens an entirely different door. But let's go into Christian literature from here. This passage comes from the Acts of Thomas, a 3rd century Christian text. It is early, and it shows us how Christians were still thinking in Greek conceptual categories. Here's the line in Greek. Pharmaka έτερα διαλύει έτερα pharmaka, και πληγάς εχίδνης θηριακή διαλύει. Translation. One drug neutralizes another drug, and an antidote dissolves the bite of a viper. Now here's why this matters. Just before this line, the text says that nothing, not iron, not fire, nothing physical, can remove what has taken hold in her soul. The Greek word used there is psyche. So the structure of the argument is this. There is something held in the soul. It cannot be cut out physically. It cannot be burned out. It cannot be forced out. And then comes the analogy. Just as one drug cancels another drug, just as an antidote neutralizes snake venom, so too something must counteract what has taken hold internally. This is pharmacological logic applied to the soul. This is not random metaphor. In Greek medicine, it was already understood. Poison can be countered by antidote. Venom can be dissolved by a counter substance. Imbalance can be corrected by applying an opposite force. And here, in a Christian text, that same structure is used to describe spiritual transformation. The soul is treated like something that can be affected, influenced, even corrected, using the logic of pharmaka. This matters because it shows continuity. Christian writers did not invent a new anthropology from scratch. They inherited Greek categories. They inherited psyche as something affected by forces, pharmakon as something that can heal or poison, and the idea that one influence can counteract another, drug versus drug, venom versus antidote, influence versus counter-influence. Now we move to another Christian source. This passage comes from the Acts of John. The Greek begins bluntly, pharmakon thanasimon, a deadly drug, a lethal poison. The king orders poison to be given. John takes it, mixes it with water, and then he prays. He says, "Mix the drug within it by your Holy Spirit, and make it become a drink of life and salvation for the healing of soul and body." Notice the language. The word for poison is pharmakon, the same word we've been tracing. Drug, remedy, poison, purifier. Here it starts as lethal, then it is transformed. The pharmakon becomes a drink of life, a drink of salvation, a healing for psyche and soma, soul and body. This is not random. This is Greek pharmacological logic, reconfigured inside Christian miracle narrative. Poison becomes antidote, death becomes life, drug becomes salvation, and it heals both the body and the soul. That pairing matters. Psyche and soma. The same embodied anthropology we've been tracing. The same integrated system. This is not medieval dualism. This is Greek structure operating inside Christian storytelling. Pharmakon is still the mechanism of transformation. But now the transformation is attributed to divine power. The vocabulary never disappeared. It was absorbed. And that tells you something profound about continuity. The language of drugs, the logic of counterpoison, the structure of purification, all of it survives. But now it is redirected toward theology, and once you see that pattern, the categories stop being separate. Medicine, ritual, salvation. They share the same conceptual backbone. The categories were never divided. Later, theology divided them. Subscribe for more deep dives into ancient words that shaped Western thought.